see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Listen, take the jacket and your shirt, and we'll see what it looks like. You can put it on your back at the chest, wherever you want.
Well, actually, I couldn't have that on my body because I hate to tell you, but it was somewhat different. In fact, it was quite a big difference. You have to understand, I was just crawling along. I had 1 day to live. I was on my knees and I was hallucinating. And then those enormous doors opened up. Lots of horses kept galloping out, and there wasn't death that was driving those horses. It was the angels. And I had this vision. Death didn't want me. Death didn't really want me.
Men are often haunted by things that happen to them in life, especially in war or other periods of great intensity. Sometimes you see these men walking the streets or driving in a car. Their lives seem to be normal, but they are not.
When I'm driving my car, I often hear the voices of my dead friends. Sometimes my friend Dwayne Martin calls me and tells me that his feet are cold. Because of this, even on a warm, sunny day, I keep my convertible top up. I was shot down over Laos in 1966 in the early phase of the Vietnam War. I never wanted to go to war. I only got into this because I had one burning desire, and that was to fly.
But that there were people down there who suffered and who died only became clear to me much later, when I was their prisoner.
This is Dieter Dengler. He came to America 40 years ago, and for the last 15 years he has lived on Mount Tamalpais, north of San Francisco.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. You see, this really seems strange to most people, but to me it's very important. It denotes freedom to be able to open or close a door. When I was a prisoner, that I couldn't open the door, and later on when I was dying, those big doors in the sky would open up. And so most people don't realize how important it is and the privilege that we have to be able to open or close a door. So anyway, that's how I got into, and so be it. Well, this is the inside of my home. As you see, when you come into my house right away, there are pictures of open doors. It's been always very important to me. It gives me a sense of freedom. Walking into my house, when I built this house 15 years ago, I focused on having this open feeling. It was very important to me that I am on top of the mountain. I didn't sit down some kind of canyon. So looking out here, you see a P-51 Spitfire. Flying was always very important to me as a child. There are little motors in there. I don't know if they still work. I can climb up there and see. Yes, they do. Anyway, again, just standing here, you see that I do have an open feeling in this house. There's a large stove. I really enjoy to cook. Food is very, very, very important to me. As you see, there's a lot of food. The refrigerator is always packed full with food. The cupboard is full of food. In fact, as I look in there, it's half empty. Not only that, below the house I have an emergency provision that I put in there years ago that I'm kind of hoarding down there. Well, I'm really curious myself now to see if everything is still good shape down here. There are this carpet here. And there's 5-gallon containers. Yeah, everything seems to be still in good shape down here. There's 1,000 pounds of rice. There's 1,200 pounds of flour and wheat. There's 300 pounds of honey. There's sugar down there. Tell you, I probably never need any of this food, but I can sleep so much better knowing that it's down there.
Well, while I was in prison, all we did talk about is food. We talked about deep freezers and refrigerators, stacking them up, and I decided I'm coming back home and I'm going to build a restaurant, a German-type restaurant, and I'm going to stack it up and never be hungry again.
This is my mother. She arrived in America after I had gained about 30 or 40 pounds. I was in San Diego in a hospital. She came on an airplane with boxes full of apples that she was passing around to all the passengers around her. She turned the meal down in the airplanes because she thought it cost her a lot of money, and she was truly starved. This is my father. I only knew my father from pictures. He was killed in the war. I miss not having a father. It was just then later on, when I was in Vietnam and my friend Dwayne's head was cut off, and the Viet Congs were all around me. They were just shooting and yelling, and I was just running along down this trail, and then I came to this river fork, and here was my father, clear as a picture, in the middle of the river, standing and pointing with his arm, and pointing for me for the direction to go. And I went behind the rocks and I worked my way up that riverbed. I heard the Viet Congs come by up the other side. They went up the other side, and then later on, about 5 days later, I was rescued going up this other side. So that was truly a miracle. Below me, you see my hometown, Wilberg. I was born there. My childhood years were spent right here. Down here, you see the church, and a few houses to the left was my house. It's not there anymore. The bombers came in and wiped out this town. The first airplanes that I ever saw in my life, they came right over here. They were fighters. They dove down into this small town. They made senseless attacks on this small village just like this. And behind me, up there, that's kind of how it looked. I had two brothers then. We were on the top window and we looked out. And we watched all this, and I clearly remember one of the airplanes came diving at our house. And it was so unusual because the cockpit was open. The pilot had black goggles that were sitting in his forehead. He was looking, he had actually turned around. He was looking in at the window, and the machine guns were just firing because the flashes, I keep seeing them coming out. And the left wingtip just missed the house by 2 or 3 feet as it whipped by. It was just a fraction of a second. It was like a vision for me. It was like an almighty being that came out. It was just something else. It's very difficult to describe. But I knew from that moment on that I want to be a pilot. I want to be a flyer. From that moment on, little Dieter needed to fly.
Adivino el parpadeo de las luces que a lo lejos van marcando mi retorno. Son las mismas que alumbraron con sus pálidos reflejos hondas horas de dolor. Y aunque no quise el regreso, siempre se vuelve al primer amor. La vieja calle donde el eco dijo.
I have a few medals that I received. It's the American Fighter Ace Medal. Right over here is the Purple Heart Air Medal, Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Navy Cross. Up here in the corner, there's a sword. It's called the Sword of Loyola. It was blessed by the Pope. It was brought over here by a bishop. There's 2 in existence. J. Edgar Hoover got one, and I was lucky to get the other one.
What does it mean for you to be a war hero?
Oh, I'm not a hero. Only people who are dead who are heroes. And that's the last thing I want to be, and I don't think of myself as a hero. No, only dead people are heroes. If I start over here, this picture was sent to me recently by a friend. This is the last shot of my airplane when I took off for Vietnam.
And this is how the airplane looked 2 hours later. And this is Dieter Dengler, 6 months later, after his rescue. He was down to 85 pounds.
I knew hunger as a child. I grew up in post-war Germany. We lived in great poverty, and I remember as children going to bombed-out buildings where we tore off wallpaper. My mother would cook the wallpaper and we would eat it because there were nutrients in the glue.
As a child, Dieter saw things around him that just made no earthly sense at all. Germany had been transformed into a dreamscape of the surreal. And then things got better. Dieter remembers the first sausage in a display window. It was the first one in years, and he stopped and stared at it. Everyone else stopped too, but nobody could afford to buy it. In post-war Germany, there was no aviation, and therefore it remained Dieter's dream to become a pilot.
This is a very, very, very old rare clock.
From age 14, Dengler apprenticed as a tool and die maker. He learned how to build church clocks.
Not only did I learn to be a church clock builder, I learned to be a blacksmith. God, what a tough apprenticeship I had. How many hours did I stand right here? How many times did I have that hammer on my side? I had this boss, he was an old man, he was a blacksmith, he had hands like that. Many times he would come up, he hit me in the face, I would be passing out. We worked from 7 in the morning till late at night, including weekends. We made 50 cents a month. It was truly horrible, but we stuck with it. And then later on in Vietnam, that's the first time I recognized it, what that meant really to me. And without this tough, tough, tough man that beat us many, many times, I could have never made it.
He finished his apprenticeship at age 18. 30 minutes after his final exam, Dieter was already en route to America because his dream of being a pilot had never died. This photo was taken the moment he left.
I left from right down here for America. I had 30 cents in my pocket. I was 2 hours out of town, I was hungry. I had 2 weeks to wait for my ship to leave, and I hitchhiked via Hamburg to Bremerhaven where the boat left. I was climbing up the ladder, I got seasick right away. In the back of the ship they were playing a German national song, Auf Wiedersehen, Auf Wiedersehen. Tears were rolling down my eyes. I stepped on the ship, got seasick. I was violently sick for 2.5 weeks. But I managed to go up in the kitchen or in the living room, not the living room, but where people were eating, and there I got sandwiches and I got oranges, and I hoarded all in my room. And then early in the morning there was an announcement that the Statue of Liberty is going to come inside. Went in my room, took this long shirt from my grandfather, tied it with string below my knees and filled it up with sandwiches, with oranges, with all this food. And I thought, we're just going to arrive, I'll walk off the ship. But we had to go through customs. Well, I never heard of customs. I was this little 18-year-old boy. I never was out of my hometown. One time for one day we went to a castle somewhere. We were extremely poor. So anyway, I had to customs. A lot of people were lined up. This custom agent came over. First thing he grabbed my shirt, pulled my shirt on, all the sandwiches and all those oranges fell on the floor. I got bead red because when I left my hometown, people laughing, they said, oh, he's going to America, he thinks money grows in the trees, They thought I'm gonna end up in jail, and now I knew they are right, I'm gonna end up in jail. I didn't speak any English, I knew a few words. Times Square. The highest house was two-story houses that I saw in Germany. Here, I'm in New York, Manhattan. Walking around, it was just a whole new world for me. But again, of course, I was extremely hungry. So I lived in the streets for about 10 days, and I met a couple of people, and finally, I joined the Air Force because I really left Germany to become a pilot. And I couldn't do it in Germany. Germany didn't have an Air Force, they didn't have an airline. I had no schooling whatsoever. We had to work to help our parents just to survive and to live. And so I went to the recruiter in New Jersey, and he said, of course, if you join the Air Force, you're going to be a pilot. I signed up. 2 hours later, I was in San Antonio, Texas. They cut my hair off, but instead of becoming a pilot, they put me in the kitchen. There were 5,000 recruits there, 7,000 recruits. I peeled potatoes for 2.5 years. And then finally, I put them in a motor pool. I changed tires, but I never got near an airplane. I went to night school, I became a citizen, and then I left for California because I knew by then what I had to do. I had to go to college, get a college degree to join the Navy. And that's what I did. I bought a car, an old VW bus. There was a big hole in the side. I parked in the parking lot. I had my surfboard in there, my skis in there. That's where I lived for 2.5 years, worked at night, went to school, and after that I joined the Navy, and then I was based in Alameda, and then from there we left on the aircraft carrier for Vietnam.
But from the air, Vietnam didn't seem real at all. For Dengler, it was like a grid on a map. He had suddenly found himself not only a pilot, but a soldier caught up in a real war. But even though it was all very real, everything down there seemed to be so alien and so abstract. It all looked strange, like a distant, barbaric dream.
Also, I flew the Skyraider over Vietnam. I had just left the carrier. I had flown 2.5 hours to a heavy flak. I was coming near my target, and I clearly remember my target was disappearing right at the wing root where the wing meets the body. And I rolled the airplane on its back, and then of course I would see the target above me, and I was coming straight down. And just when I was inverted, there was this loud explosion of the right side. Half my wing was gone. And I remember the brightness of it was just like a lightning striking. The airplane then tumbled through the air. I reached down and I dropped my tanks. and I thought I'll belly the airplane down in this valley. But then more explosions went off of my right wing. Boom, boom, boom. The brightness is really what I remember. I decided maybe I can fly the airplane and glide it right over this ridge. There was a ridge on the right-hand side. There was a lot of trees, as I said. There was an enormous tree in front of me, and just before I hit it, I kicked full right rudder. The airplane yawed to the right. There was an impact on the left wing. They snapped this thick tree off, and of course, then the left wing went back. Then the entire tail, the rudder, horizontal stabilizer, everything just tumbled by. I clearly remember the canopy started cracking in the lower left-hand corner, just like slow motion. It was cracking, it ripped off, then my helmet was jerked off my head, and then the airplane started to cartwheel. And then I must have passed out, because maybe a minute later I came back. I was laying 100 feet from the airplane. Dust was still in the air. It was very, very quiet. Of course, I crawled out real quickly, and then I ran towards the jungle to get away.
You know, many times people ask me if I was afraid, if there was fear when I was shot down. There really is no time. I had to unstrap, I had to drop my fuel tanks, I had to put the airplane in a small clearing. It was extremely difficult to fly this airplane. There was no time to have fear. And then later on, it's just like on an aircraft carrier. 3 o'clock in the morning, you're flying through this monsoon rain. It's really not a rain, it's a waterfall that you're shooting through at 80 feet over the water, 200 miles an hour, trying to find the aircraft carrier. You have only contact through your headset with the operator on the ship. It's total darkness. And finally, there was this enormous bang as you hit the back of the aircraft carrier on your landing. Then as you pull over to the side, as I turned my engine off, and the engine would spin down and go wop, 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 spin down. Then my legs, that's the time when my legs start shaking, and they would shake and shake and shake, and I'm trying to hold them. I couldn't even hold them. I would sometimes have to sit in the cockpit for 5 minutes before I could crawl out. And ironically, later on, just before dying, there is no more fear. It's like a dream. It's just like floating along in a real thick medium. I used to pinch myself. There was no more pain. And I thought, is this real? Is this unreal? And this is basically what death looks like to me. Two days after I was shut down, I was captured. I did the unforgivable. I crossed a small clearing. I came out of the thick jungle. I came to a small trail. I looked to the left. I looked to the right. There was no one there. I wanted to run across. I was at about 10 yards out of it, and someone yelled, "You, you." I turned to the right. There's a guy standing there with a pistol. Another guy was standing there with a rifle. My hand shot in the air. I yelled in German, "Nicht schießen, nicht schießen." Right away, I was surrounded by 6 other guys. They stripped off my clothes. I was searched. They took everything away. They bandaged my left leg with bamboo because I heard that in the crash. And then we started to run. We ran and ran. Every so often I would collapse. They would massage my leg. They would give me some water. And then late in the evening we'd arrive underneath a cluster of trees so the airplanes couldn't see us. Normally what they would do, they would take 4 pegs on the ground. I would have to lay on the ground. They would tie my ankles to the pegs, and they would tie my hands to the pegs.
In his dreams, Dengler would walk through an airport. He was going to fly back home to the Black Forest. But all the planes had been smashed to pieces. Yet he knew that the pieces would start to move and to reassemble themselves again into real planes, as a broken coffee cup in a film played backwards puts itself together and leaps back up on a table.
I was sure that my flight would be on time. But then the pieces of the plane didn't jump back together, as I had expected, and I grew more and more horrified, and I was glad when I finally woke up and found myself bitten by mosquitoes. In the mornings I wake up and a lot of times I couldn't even see because the mosquitoes had stung, and my face was all swollen up. Then we just walked for days and days like that. There were a lot of airplanes in the air. They were looking for me, my buddies. And I need to make a signal. I need to have some kind of device to signal to them. And luckily at one time I spotted a small survival mirror in the tobacco pouch of one of my guards. I hung around these guards all the time because sometimes we would walk late in the evening. It was total dark. My hands were tied. The guard would be in front of me. My hands would be tied. It would go over his shoulder. Here I had the right guard in front of me, and very carefully, ever so carefully, I opened his pocket and I took this box
Dengler
out,
succeeded in stealing the mirror, and for the first time he spent the night in a hut.
My legs, my ankles would be tied together with a rope. The rope would go down. There would be a peg on the ground. That's where I would be tied up. They would feed me up here. Then when the sleeping time came, I would then lay down. A guard would be in my right. A guard would be in my left. There would be rifles there. And that night I woke up about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the morning because it was bitter cold. They were snoring so loud. I got up. I knew that was the right time. I kicked my legs up 2 or 3 times really hard. The peg gave way. I came up, I untied my legs. Slowly I came forward to this edge, and very so carefully I let myself down to the edge. Just when I hit the bottom, the pigs and the dogs and the chickens ran off. There was a hell of a racket. I couldn't even back up. I lay down again. I didn't move. They kept on snoring. Nobody noticed. I tried it one more time, and then I was free. I was in the jungle, but I couldn't move because it was so thick. But my target was a mountain, a karst mountain just like that. And that's what I was heading for. I'd seen that in the moonlight, but I didn't realize it was a karst mountain. There was crevices after crevice. There was very, very sharp rock. It was very, very difficult to go up to this rock. I finally got on top. There was no vegetation on top. That day, nothing came. They had stopped looking for me, not a single airplane. The only thing that really came was the sun. And it got hot. I didn't count on that because I was for the last 2 weeks in the jungle. And it was cool down there, and I was already getting delirious, and I saw all those, it was just terrible up there. And finally, I decided to work my way down from this hill towards a water hole. I had seen a stinking water hole in the bottom of this hill, and that was my target because I knew water was the only thing that would make me survive.
His guards knew where to find him. The moment he started to drink the putrid water, they were all over him. From then on, the torture began. They would hang him upside down and put an ant nest over his face until he lost consciousness. For several nights, they suspended him into a well shaft in such a way that he almost died a slow death from drowning. But he was worth more to them alive. He was their prized possession.
And all of a sudden, we came out of the jungle into an open area. Real red, dusty area. There were about 30 guards standing there. They had formed a circle. I was dragged in the center of the circle, and there were 2 North Vietnamese guys were standing there. They had their caps on, the red stars on it. They had khaki uniforms on. They started yelling and screaming and started kicking me. And all of a sudden, one of the guards came across the circle, walked towards me. He had his rifle in his hand, the butt first, and he came towards me. He hesitated a couple of times. He swung towards me. I moved my head. He hit me in the shoulder, knocked me down on my back. The gun went off, and I clearly remember looking across. Another one of the guards closed his eyes, fell backwards over. He had no shirt on. He had just a loincloth on. I saw the blood coming out just above his kidneys. His buddy saw that. He took his gun, started shooting at this guy who shot this guy. I'm laying on the ground. All of a sudden, bullets are flying. They're screaming and yelling. They had forgotten about me. I thought it was the end of me. I had closed my eyes. I waited to be shot myself. I closed my eyes. I looked over. I saw someone wrap a loincloth around this guy's waist. You know, it was natural for them to be really angry at me now. I had escaped from them. They had lost face, and they really wanted to get even. Whenever we near the village, that's when they really became aggressive. They had this new idea. My legs were tied up, my arms were tied up, my hands were tied up. I was tied behind the water buffalo. They hit the water buffalo with a stick. He started taking off. I was hopping behind it. I was trying to keep my balance, but pretty soon I fell over. A couple of 2 or 3 of the guards, the bad ones, kept walking to the right and left. They were kicking me in the face with the dust all the time. They were kicking me. Other guys would jump into my back. The kids were laughing. They thought it was just this was a lot of fun. Later on, they wanted me to sign something condemning the American aggression in Vietnam. I didn't sign it. I didn't believe in it. They came up with this idea. They stuck small little pieces of bamboo underneath my fingernails. They cut my arms. They put pieces of bamboo, actually they stuck it in there and they left a piece of bamboo in there. They cut here, they cut here, they cut here, at various different places. Then one guy had this idea, they put this rope around my upper arm. Like a tourniquet, they put a piece of wood in there and twisted it until the nerves were cut against the bone. My hand would drop and this hand was completely unusable for 6 months. They were just always thinking of something to do to me. It's Christmas time in my hometown in Germany. It is beautiful. All the decorations, it's like a Christmas calendar. But many, many years before, during the Nazi time, it was a different story. In fact, in this town, 100% of the people voted for Hitler, except one person, my grandfather. He was picked up at the house. They hung signs around his neck saying that he was a traitor. They paraded him through town. With a fanfare of drums and trumpets, people spat out of the windows, water was poured on him. And he feared for his life. He thought he's not going to live through it. And for me, 30 years later, when I was a pilot in Vietnam, I was a prisoner. I was tortured, and they wanted me to sign a piece of paper saying that I condemned the American action in Vietnam. And I was strong enough not to do that. Many times this strength came through my grandfather. I was thinking of him, and if he could do it, so could I do it.
Stop! Tụi đi đi, tụi.
Uh-oh, this feels a little bit too close to home.
Chặt Thảo. Bye.
Of course, Dieter knew it was only a film, but all the old terror returned as if it were real.
I thought, you guys behind me with your camera can only see my back, but you can't know how my heart is thumping inside. I told myself, okay, play along with them. Running like this might chase the demons away. Almost everything that I learned in survival school back in California, I couldn't use in the jungle. I watched my guards, they taught me a lot. They taught me how to set traps, they taught me how to make fire. In the jungle it's quite easy to find an old piece of bamboo, which is right here. You split it in half, and then you mount half in a vertical position. You take 4 or 5 sticks and to hold it into place. Then you take the other half and you cut a groove in the other one from the top. You cut this groove just far enough in so it just barely comes back on the other side. Then you take a machete or anything else and you make some scrapings of the bamboo. As you can see, it looks like little wool. Now I have prepared this a little bit already, but you take this wool and you put it over this crack, then you start rubbing.
Being a prisoner, all of Dengler's thoughts were focused on another escape and on survival. Back in the mid-60s, American strategic thinking was turned against Russia, so all survival meant survival in Russia and Siberia. A jungle war didn't factor much in their thinking, and that's why their instructional films look somewhat funny. You know, when it rained that hard, you didn't have to collect water. Of course, our man immediately comes across Heart of Palm. The film hints as easily as in the supermarket. Very important is that you've got a knife. Of course, our man also has his whetstone on him. and you better look hard for the enemy. And now the knife seems to be sharp as a razor. You've got to put it to the test. A leaf should slice easily in two. Now, if the leaf doesn't cooperate, you can still chew it. Let's suppose you are wounded. It's always smart to have your medicine kit on you. You apply the right ointment, rub it in, sleeve down, and done. And it's a good idea to bring your radio transmitter along. You make your position known to the planes above. And then you shoot a flare. The rescue helicopter spot it, and you better scramble for a clearing. The helicopter is already waiting. But now this is very odd. What for God's sake is our man signaling so frantically to the helicopter right above him?
As we were walking through the jungle, we always had fire with us. One of our guards had this little container on wires. It was full of charcoal. He would swing it back and forth so it wouldn't go out. Some of the other guards would have a fan made out of bamboo. They would cut it on top with a machete, then they would beat it flat with a rock. They knew exactly what wine to cut. Some white sap would come out. It was really sticky. They would smear it all over the surface here. And as we were walking along, they would just see a small or a big bug way up on a branch or on a leaf. They would reach up very carefully, and the wings of this bug would stick on it. They would take it off and they would lay it on top of this charcoal. And we were walking along. They were barbecuing all the time. In fact, one time I turned around, they had a small bird barbecuing. When we got there in the evening, they weren't hungry. I was shot down over Laos, and of course I was captured by the Pathet Lao. We started walking towards the east, towards Vietnam, and about 2.5 weeks later I was turned over to the Viet Cong. Even though later on I was kept in a Pathet Lao camp, it was clear to me that the North Vietnamese were running the show. There were a different breed of people. I was frightened of them. They were very honest, they were very precise. When I walked with them, we would come into a village. They would line up all the people, they would count the people, they would write down the name of the village, they would look at their watches, it would be 7:28, they would note the time, they would tie me down different at night. There was no chance that I could escape. In fact, there was one incident that's very vivid in my mind. Initially, when I was captured, they took everything away from me, except my engagement ring, and insisted of keeping it and let me have it. And here, about 2.5 or 3 weeks later, we arrived in this village. We came to a hut. It just looked something like this. There was a villager in the corner. He was cooking. Next thing, he's next to me. He gave me a plate of rice. He smiled at me. He was very friendly. All of a sudden, he grabs over, he grasps my hand. He gets a hold of my ring. He starts pulling my ring off. And of course, I'm pulling back, and it's going back and forth like that. There's no way this guy's going to get my ring. He got up. He left. I thought it was all over. All of a sudden, a few seconds later, he's coming back with a machete. He raises his arm. I realized then I better let him have my ring. The North Vietnamese, they were in a corner. They were doing something over there. They were not aware what was happening. They got up, got our stuff together, and off we went. We left. I was disappointed. I was unhappy. And the longer we walked, the angrier I get. And about an hour and a half or 2 hours later, I stopped them. I showed them my finger. It was all white where the ring had been. First, they didn't understand what I was talking about. I made stealing gestures. They got together, they talked, and they turned around, started walking back towards this village. Of course, I was happy. I was thinking I'm going to get my ring back. But I wasn't prepared of what happened next. We got in this village. Next thing, they find this villager. They just beat the hell out of this guy. And then they grab this guy's hand. Violently, they grabbed his hand. They put him on top of the table. They put his finger there. They chopped his finger off. I'm leaping back. The blood is squirting out. The finger's laying on the ground. The North Vietnamese bends down. He picks up this finger. He pulls off this ring. He sticks it on my finger. I was speechless. I had caused this misery. I felt horrible. He nodded to me. We turned around. We walked off. I realized right then and there, you just don't fool around with the Viet Congs. It's just a movie. Don't worry about it. And you still got your fingers and everything. Finally, after 3.5 weeks, I arrived at the prison camp. I looked forward to coming to the camp. I've been beaten so much, I have lost so much blood, I've been unconscious so many times. I wanted to share my misery with someone else. Other pilots, I was hoping to see someone, maybe meet someone that I've known before. Maybe a doctor would be there, but it was totally different than what I expected. First of all, I thought I was all alone in this camp. High bamboo walls on the side, the huts were built out of grass and out of bamboo. I was let in, they threw me into one of the huts, and only 3 hours later, they opened the door and let the other guys come out. I couldn't believe my eyes. The first guy was carrying his intestines around his hand. There were 6 of them. There were 4 Thais, 2 Americans, Dwayne Martin, who became my friend later on. Next guy came out, he had no teeth. With a rusty nail in the rock, they would knock each other's teeth in to let the pus out. They'd been there 2.5 years. It was just awful. I looked at them, I realized that's exactly what I'm gonna look in 6 months, so I said, I'm leaving tonight. No, I was advised not to because of the rain. We needed the water to drink. At nights, we would be handcuffed. Sometimes we would get cross-handcuffed, sometimes straight handcuffed. Cross-handcuffed, this is a more modern handcuff, would be like that. Left wrist would go to the right wrist of the guy on my right, and my right wrist would go to the left wrist of the guy on my left. This way we'd be together. Everybody had dysentery 20 times a night. This guy made a motion, this guy had to make the motion. On top of it, our legs were on foot blocks, big wooden blocks they made. Our feet would be driven through there. A pen would come in between. Sometimes would be longer, sometimes it would be shorter. And this is the way they expected to sleep. We had no blankets. It was miserable cold.
In the misery of those nights, Dengler often dreamt of oceans and foreign shores.
And I dreamt that a boat appeared, and the whole American Navy came to rescue me. And I waved and I shouted, but they wouldn't listen. They just kept on going and went somewhere else.
As far as food, they themselves were very poor. At the beginning, we would get a handful of rice, then later on a handful of rice for all of us. Sometimes they would catch a deer. They would cut a deer open. They would take the grass out from the inside. That's what we would get to eat. They would keep the meat. They would take the meat and stuff it in a bamboo container. After 4 or 5 days, it would rot so bad for themselves. They would come in with a towel. They would pour it out. It would be white. It would cover with maggot. It would stink to high heaven. First time I tried it, vomited. But if you didn't eat it, you just died. We were lucky though, because we couldn't go to the bathrooms. Once every 3 or 4 weeks, they would let us out. We would go to the bathroom right below us. It would stink to high heaven. I mean, it was awful. But there were rats down there. But we couldn't catch the rats. But there was a snake there. And every so often, we were lucky to catch that snake. We would look. We would lay on our bellies. We would watch the snake line up on the rat. Get a hold of the rat. We had the stick. We would get the snake. We pulled the snake up. We pulled the rat out. We cut the rat apart. And everybody got his share. We lost, of course, a lot of weight waiting for the rain to come. But we had to supplement our food for the day that we left for freedom.
Well, initially, initially February and March, we were allowed to go to the bathroom in the morning for about 2 minutes. And we have a couple of tubes you go in at night, and you can imagine you're in big block in woods, and you're handcuffed like that, and you got to go to the bathroom at night with a guy having diarrhea or dysentery. So it was a real mess, but while we walked down, we run down like hell. It's about a 20 or 30-foot walk to the hole, and while we did this, they shot at us. And it got so close that some of the prisoners came back with black in the face or greased their hair with a bullet, and so we didn't want to go anymore. We rather stayed with the tubes.
The question is, why were they shooting at you?
Just harassment. They will take a gun and they show it to you that they put a round in it and they put it right on your head and they take the safety off and they go click, 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 and they laugh. And stuff like that. So, lucky to be here.
The camp was inside Laos, and the shortest way out would have been east to the ocean. But there were impassable mountains and, of course, North Vietnam. What made most sense for them was to go west, to float down a river to the Mekong and then cross to freedom in Thailand.
Our plan to escape from this prison camp was planned right down to the last detail. We had 6 months, we're waiting for the monsoon rain. We had a little problem amongst ourselves. Some of the other prisoners didn't want to escape. In 1966, there was really no war in Laos. They were hoping to be released pretty soon, and also they were afraid of being shot on the way out. This changed pretty dramatically real quick because the Thais, who spoke the language in this hut, overheard the guards outside talking about that they would take us in the jungle, shoot us, so it would look like we'd escaped, because they wanted to go home anyway because they had hardly anything else to eat. Of course, now we all thought alike, and we had to move really, really quick. And the plan was that if I would make it out of my hut into this hut over here without being seen, the other guys would follow me. Now we had, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, we had a little diagram, we had little squares with names on it for the people and for the rifles. We would look through the cracks, we would observe them, we would listen to them, and pretty soon we knew exactly where every rifle was, where every person was, because this was very, very important that they would all be in the kitchen at the same time, because our plan was that while they're in the kitchen, we would encircle them, we would capture them, lock them up, we hold the camp, signal the airplanes at night, and be rescued right out of there. Now, during the day, there was only one time that we could do this. We had about 2 minutes, 120 seconds to do this. And this is when the cook over here would yell, chow time, food time. They would take
Only then would the guards leave their rifles behind. Next problem was to get out of the handcuffs.
It's quite simple. And nowadays, everybody ought to know how to open the handcuff. If you come a little closer with your camera, I can show you how to do that. With this small key, I'm going to open the handcuff to show you the functions inside. As you look in there, you see the small spring going back and forth. You also see a few teeth in there that hold the handcuff in place. Now, just with a regular paper clip, you can open this handcuff quite simply by inserting one of these ends into the opening, apply pressure to the spring, pulling the handcuff open. The day came, the cook yelled, chow time. I stripped my blocks, I let myself to the floor. I was underneath my hut now. I crawled quickly over to the logs, those heavy logs that I had to lift out. I actually loosened them the day before. My heart was really pounding. I crawled across. I came to this fence, I untied the rattan, slipped the bamboo up and went through the store, and I leaped in this hut. There were 3 rifles in there. 2 I passed away, and the other one I kept. I ran out in the open. Nobody came from this side except the guards. They're running in my direction. I must have heard or seen the other guys. And this big shootout started. All of a sudden, the bullets were flying. Somehow we had miscalculated. Somebody had a rifle in there. I had this submachine gun in my hand. I'd never shot one before. When I pulled the trigger, it practically flew out of my hand. It raced up like that, and this allowed them to close this distance real quick. They came within 2 or 3 feet from me. The moron, one of the guys, had a machete in his hand. He came within 4 or 5 feet. I shot him through the hip. It lifted him up. It threw him down to the ground. Next thing I'm looking up. He's getting up again. He still had the machete. He's still coming at me. Of course, this time I couldn't miss. He was right 2 or 3 feet in front of me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't have a scratch. There's 5 dead guards laying on the ground. Two of them got away. They ran a zigzag pattern. They got in the jungle. I knew then, right then and there, they would get help, and we had to get out of there. Where was Dwayne? I saw him behind this bush over here. He had vomited. I yelled to him, Dwayne, let's get out here, let's get out of here. We took off, we ran down between this kitchen, we ran amongst those dead guys laying on the ground. And it was very important because our shoes were tied together in a bundle. We're hanging on this hut over here. The shoes we needed in the jungle, but when we got there, they were already taken. The other guys must have taken them, run off with them. And then Dwayne and I, we had no choice but to turn around. Barefoot, we ran into the jungle. Now, of the 7 of us that escaped, I was the only one that came out alive. The other one disappeared in the jungle and nobody ever heard from them again. God, how I ever made it through this jungle, barefoot for weeks, I never know.
Dieter and Dwayne were struggling to make their way through the jungle, weak and starved, their feet badly cut by thorns. After 10 days they reached a river, somewhat like this one. Only the river was much higher because of the monsoon rains.
We were ecstatic. We felt like dancing, and we thought that this was our highway to freedom.
Exhausted as they were, they managed to build a small raft and climb aboard.
There we were on this river, this beautiful river, drifting down between hills and mountains for a hour and a half down towards Thailand. I thought I heard something. I said, Dwayne, do you hear anything? But then it got quiet again. But when we came around the next hill, we heard it at the same time. We both yelled waterfalls. He leaped off. I jumped in the water. I was actually in the water. I grabbed the rifles. I kicked as hard as I could. I was taking off. I was going then towards the side. Dwayne was already nearly over there, but I had those rifles in my arm and I couldn't really swim that fast. And the current started picking up and quicker. And I thought I wouldn't make it. And finally, there was a couple of rocks sticking out. I clung all these rocks and I looked over the side and our raft had tumbled down to 300 feet, disintegrated on the bottom, and we were speechless. I looked at Dwayne. He was snow white. We had just escaped death. I mean, it was truly touch and go. We were speechless. We just sat there after I made it to shore, trying to decide what to do. One of the rifles we threw away. It was vertical going down on both sides. We had a very difficult time because it was full of green moss. It had been after during the rainy season. The ground was very muddy, and on the vines we were sliding down, helping each other down, and late in the evening we arrived on the bottom. We were totally exhausted. We were totally disillusioned. Then barefoot over rocks and sticks, we down the river went, looking forward towards freedom.
To this day, I often think about Dwayne Martin. We shared so many hardships, hopes, and despair, and this made us grow very close. At the end, Dwayne was closer to me than anyone else in my life, even closer than my mother and my brothers.
Behind me is the Mekong. We call it the Big Muddy. Over there is Laos. I was a prisoner of war over here. Over here is Thailand. Freedom. We talked about this river so many times. We dreamed about this river. This river was our target, but we never reached it. When I think about it now, even though it's over 30 years ago, it's just like it happened yesterday. I remember Dwayne and I, we had nearly starved to death when we escaped the camp. We were barefoot in the jungle. With the first mile, our feet were cut to shreds. In fact, they swell on to big white stumps. We had found a single sole of a tennis shoe, and we alternated wearing it, and we would tie it to one of our foot with rattan. And then came the monsoon. The monsoon is something else. I mean, you have to really be there to know what I'm talking about. It is deafening. You could scream on top of your lungs and nobody can hear you. The water comes down like somebody turned over a bathtub. It goes for hours, for days. The mud, the bamboo, all all the stuff that comes down from the mountains. In fact, Dwayne and I, we had to look for high grounds. We would tie ourselves down to a stump of trees, not to be swept down with this mud overnight. Of course, we would hug each other. We needed each other for warmth. We needed each other for friendship in this misery. And then came dawn. I would look over there and I couldn't even recognize Dwayne. Dwayne would be covered from top to bottom with mud and blood. I looked the same. We had leeches, not 20, not 50, hundreds. It was like a belt. It was black around there. Our legs were covered with leeches. They were looking for the soft spots between our fingers, underneath the arms and nose and the ears. It was awful. They're tiny, tiny creatures, like a needle. They find every tiny little hole. They attach themselves, they suck themselves full with blood as big as this finger. We would then now take our rags off. We would take bamboo and we scrape them off, and on we went. But then there were a couple of times we thought we really had it made. One time we built a raft. We had to abandon the raft. The raft went over the waterfall. But then later on we made this beautiful fire. We waved at night to the airplane. They saw us. They circled overhead, and we knew we were going to be rescued that next morning. Later we hugged each other. We cried together. We talked about who's going to helicopter first. What are we going to eat? Who are we going to call? And then morning came and we waited and waited and nothing happened. It was a blow. What a disappointment. But then we had to move on because we were starving to death. In fact, we couldn't even walk anymore. We were crawling and laying on our knees down this small little trail, and all of a sudden there was a small boy on our left. He was carrying a water container over his shoulder, and all of a sudden there was all this commotion. People were running all over each way. There was noise. Dwayne and I, right away, we were on our knees, and we put our hands together. We said, hello, Sabai. Dwayne then started sitting back and started getting up. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. I looked over there. A villager was standing there. He had a machete in his hand, high above his head. He just hesitated for a second, then he swung. He swung for me. I ducked. It missed me by a few inches. He hit Dwayne in the upper leg. The blade was deeply buried in it. Dwayne screamed. He reached down. He grabbed his leg, screaming. And with the next swipe, Dwayne's head came off. Blood squirting out. I started screaming. I leaped toward this villager. He turned around. He ran. In fact, they all started running. And unknowns to me, I had reached down and grabbed this rubber sole from his foot. I turned around and ran. When 30 seconds before, I was crawling along. Dwayne, my friend, he was gone. And from then on, my motions, my progress became mechanical. In fact, I couldn't care less if I would live or die. But then later on, there was this bear, this beautiful bear that was following me. It was circling me. In fact, sometimes when it was gone, I missed it. It was just like a dog. It was just like a pet. Of course, I knew this bear was there. He was waiting to eat me. When I think about it, this bear meant death to me. And it is really ironic. That's the only friend I had at the end was death.
Parpadeo de las luces que a lo lejos van marcando mi retorno. Son las mismas que alumbraron con sus pálidos reflejos hondas horas de dolor. Y aunque no quise el regreso, siempre se vuelve al primer amor. La vieja calle donde el eco dijo, tuya es su vida, tuyo es su querer.
How Dieter Dengler has been able to cope with all this remains a mystery. He hides behind the casual remark that this was the fun part of his life. Dieter took an early retirement from the armed forces and became a civilian test pilot. He survived 4 more crashes and flies to this day. Death did not want him.
What's that, about 20 pounds? No, 30 actually. 30 pounds, wow. God, I'm surprised. How long did that take to cook that thing? 5 hours. 5 hours.
Gene?
Dieter. God, my suspicions are true. Oh, it's good to see you.
Happy Thanksgiving, friend.
This is Eugene Dietrich, to whom Dieter Dengler ultimately owes his life. Dieter wanted to surprise him on Thanksgiving.
I wouldn't be here without you, and I really appreciate what you did for me and that you followed up and...
Sit down and tell me all about it.
Okay. Oh, my God.
You're losing hair, both of them.
Tell me, did you have any suspicion? Did you have a little bit?
I had a little bit.
Yeah.
You don't come down here for no
No.
one telling you what it is,
I
but
know.
by God, it's good to see you.
All right. I haven't done that too many times, but...
What a turkey. It seems like yesterday that Andy and I started to take off that morning. I've said many times to people that this was 1,000,001 shot. If everything hadn't gone exactly right, we would never have found you, just step by step. We were late getting off, supposed to leave at 8. Didn't get off until about noon or 1 o'clock. We came up and it was an armed recce area, which meant that you could bomb anything in the area if you thought it was enemy.
Right.
And I left Andy high, stay in contact with Da Nang, and I went down on the deck. And I saw this big wide river coming out of the mountain. I thought, I'll go up that as the first shot. And again, if it hadn't been that you were right in the bend, because as you fly straight, I couldn't see down. But just where you were, there was a bend in the river. And I made that 90-degree bank and looked down, and there
Split
was that
second.
rock, and this nut sitting down there waving at me. And I thought that was nice and flew on. I must have gone 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll never know whatever made me come back. But something just didn't settle right. That I guess it wasn't a conscious effort, but natives don't
So hang on, wave to
wave to
enemy
a fully
airplanes.
loaded airplane. So I came back, and when you were there the second time waving, I really wasn't sure what it was. And
Where, you know that piece of white material, you know where it came from?
the flare,
The flare. Actually, it wasn't the flare. About 5 days before, you know, I had burned down a village, and the Americans saw it, and they dropped flares, and it was one of those parachutes. And I had already given up
it
at that
looked like
time.
fishing nets from where I was.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll pull that sucker down. I had the thing in my little backpack, and when I heard that airplane, I didn't even look up. All I could do is reach back there. That's when I pulled that white piece of material out. And I was thinking, SOS, SOS. How does it go? Does the S go this way? Or the S go this way? And I ripped my pants off, trying to lay it down, and every so often I would look up, and you were way in the corner between the clouds. I thought, oh God, please don't let them leave. Please don't let them leave. As I was laying out this SOS.
And as I came back around the next time, I asked Andy if he could see anything, and that's when he saw the parachute and said it looks like he has an SOS. Well, that gave us both the clue that someone was down there, and the fact that you were there after 3 passes. So we pulled off to the side, and I called the Crown Aircraft, which is the C-121 controller in that area, and asked them if anyone had been shot down. And they said there was no Air Force, no Navy, no Marine, no Laotians, no Thai.
Nobody.
And I said, well, insisted someone was down there. And they said, well, it couldn't be. And a long conversation went on, but we finally got approval, and they got the rescue helicopters, 2 of them. And the aircraft on the coast escorted them in. I took the lead helicopter when they got in sight, put him down and told him where you were, and went out. And that's when he dropped his long-range tank up the river from you.
That's the
And
first time I realized it was for real, because, you know, I was hallucinating all this time. And when I smelled that gasoline, I knew it was for real.
And he couldn't get down very low because of the mountain. And he dropped the penetrator cable down, and I saw you climbing aboard, and it was then that my heart began to beat, I'll tell you.
Well, you know, I couldn't even pull down the zip on the penetrator. I had it in my armpit as I was going up. The helicopter had come in, and all the trees and the bushes of the horses, the prop wash was blowing me around down there, and I had a hard time catching that. And as I was going up, I was just going round and round. They were taking off because the Viet Congs, they were shooting up at them. The guys up there had the machine guns, not only on them, but also at me, because they thought that I might be a Viet Cong.
Probably had the same idea I had.
Not recognizing Dieter as an American and fearing he might be a Viet Cong on a suicide mission, a black corporal on board the helicopter threw his weight of 300 pounds upon the skeleton that was left of Dieter and wrestled him to the floor. The previous day, Dieter had seen a snake swimming in the water and had bitten it in 2 from hunger. Searching for explosives, the corporal pulled out half a snake from under Dieter's shirt. It gave him such a shock that he fell halfway out of the helicopter and had to be rescued himself.
So as he started to pull away and I saw you going in and the thing didn't blow up, I gave a great sigh of relief. I'll tell you, that scared me because I thought my career would be over at that. And as they went away, why, I asked them if they could identify you, and they said that they didn't know who it was, but he claimed that he was a Navy lieutenant that had been shot down several months before. And I'll tell you, my heart gave a sigh of relief.
Dieter wanted to be back with the fleet, back on his ship. He had been taken to the hospital in Da Nang. He was safe now, but he was sure this was only a dream. For him, this was just a mirage. He wanted to run, and they had to tie him to his bed. So his friends came and snuck him out and brought him back to the carrier. The elevator took him down to the hangar bay. It was a drizzly day, and there had been hardly anyone on deck. But there was something strange, something almost eerie about the fact that no one was there.
Now, unknowns to myself, the Admiral had assembled about 4,000 people up here in the hangar bay. They were waiting for me, and I was thinking that nobody would know that I was alive, that it's going to be a total surprise. So the engine got turned off, the airplane was pulled in here, came over here. It was just, of course, loaded with people. 4,000 guys were waiting. They opened the door, there was a red carpet, and the yelling and the scream started. It was such an emotional moment, I just can't really describe it. The tears, all my friends that I've been to flight training with, Norman, Spook, Farkas, Lissard, they all were there, tears were rolling, hugging. And finally, I was on the aircraft carrier. There were all my buddies, my other pilots there. They did everything they could for me. It was just unreal. The Admiral packed his bag. He left. He said, Dieter, my quarters are your quarters. I slept in his bed. At nights, I would have dreams. I would yell and scream. My friends would tie me down. They even got afraid of me sometimes. So they finally figured it out, and they would take me up in the cockpit. At nights, they would take me up on top of the carrier deck, and they would pack me into a cockpit, put 2 or 3 pillows next to me. That's where I felt safe. That's where I felt truly, truly safe. And then I would sleep in there. In fact, later on, when I was at different bases, sometimes at nights, I would come down and I would go to an aircraft cockpit and I would just bed in there and I would sleep in there. And I brought you here to show you all these airplanes. I mean, this is a heaven for pilots. I mean, just look around. In every direction, there's just miles and miles and miles of airplanes everywhere. Here, miles and miles. God, look at the cockpits. This is just fantastic. This is just really, really, truly beautiful, and one could really feel at home here. This is just a heaven for pilot.
Oh,